The smell of cheap cologne hit me first, clinging to the air like a wet dog. Inside, 4 unfamiliar cars in the drive, a pair of Brenda's lace panties draped over the living room lamp. Then her screams, not fear, but a guttural pleasure that ripped through me. I stood, exposed, my world shattering around the sound. That's it, baby, Ken Miller's voice echoed. You're all mine, you cheap little slut. The client meeting in Albany had dissolved by 11:30. A technical snag on their end, a problem with procurement, meant our presentation was no longer relevant. My flight home was scheduled for the next morning, but with nothing holding me, I changed it. I wanted to be back in my own bed that night. It was just after 4 when I pulled my Tacoma into the driveway. My garage door was closed, as expected, but the sight of 3 unfamiliar vehicles parked haphazardly in front of it stopped me. A silver Ford F-150, a dark blue Dodge Charger, and an older model Subaru Outback. None of them belonged to anyone I knew, certainly not friends or family. I parked behind the Subaru, killed the engine, and sat for a moment. The air was still, a typical late afternoon in early spring. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the highway. I stepped out, walked to the front door, and used my key. The door swung inward without resistance. The smell hit me first. Not cologne, but something cloyingly sweet, like cheap perfume mixed with stale beer. My eyes registered the chaos of the living room. 4 sets of clothes were strewn across the carpet. 2 pairs of men's jeans, shirts, a blazer, and a silk blouse I recognized as Brenda's. Her bra was draped over the back of the recliner. Then I heard it. A low moan. A woman's voice. Brenda. The sound intensified, rising into a series of sharp gasps and pleas. It was not a sound of distress, not fear, but something raw and passionate, undeniably intimate. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. The logic of the situation clicked into place, stark and absolute. Brenda was upstairs, in our bedroom, with someone. The clothes, the cars, the sounds, they all aligned. I moved to the stairs, each step a deliberate action. The sounds grew louder, more frantic. I heard a man's voice, guttural. Then Brenda's. A primal scream that tore through the air, vibrating through the walls. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. I reached the landing, pausing just outside the bedroom door. The door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch. I pushed it open just enough to see inside, to confirm what my ears and logic had already told me. The sight was clear. Brenda was on the bed, her face contorted. 3 men were in the room. One was Ken Miller, his heavy frame positioned behind her. I saw his face, triumphant. Another man was standing near the closet, adjusting his pants. The third was just off to the side, watching. Ken's voice, deep and gravelly, cut through the sounds of movement. "That's it, baby," he grunted. "You're all mine, you cheap little slut." Screaming my name like that, Brenda made a sound, a whimper that was lost in his words. I pulled back from the doorframe, my movements silent, unhurried. No one had seen me. My mind was clear, focusing on the next logical step. I descended the stairs, not running, but walking with purpose to my home office. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out my digital video camera. It was a Sony, a decent model. I checked the battery indicator. It was full. I ejected the cassette, saw plenty of recording time left. I returned to the top of the stairs, standing quietly in the hallway. I held the camera, pointed the lens through the narrow opening of the bedroom door. The autofocus hummed softly as it locked onto the scene inside. I pressed record. The red light illuminated. I kept the camera steady, methodically panning to show Brenda's face, the faces of the men. It was important to document everything, for legal purposes. The sounds continued, Brenda's cries, Ken's rough encouragement. I held the camera for 5 minutes, then 7, then almost 10. Each second was a concrete piece of evidence. My hand tightened on the camera, the plastic molding digging into my palm. A tremor started in my fingers. It was enough. I stopped recording, pressing the button with a definitive click. My next destination was the small safe bolted to the floor in the back of my closet. I entered the combination, the tumblers clicking softly. Inside, my Sig Sauer P226 lay nestled in foam. I removed it, checking the magazine. Full. I thumbed the safety off, the small lever moving with a solid click. The weight of the weapon in my hand felt solid, reassuring. I walked back into the living room. The discarded pants lay in disarray. I knelt, going through the pockets. Ken Miller's wallet, his keys. The other two men's wallets. Their keys. I took them all. Brenda's purse was on the coffee table. Her wallet, her keys. I took those too. I bundled the keys and wallets into a compact pile. Stepping outside, the cool evening air was a sharp contrast to the stale heat inside. I walked to the silver Ford F-150 first. Its tires were large, easy targets. I removed the cap from the valve stem, pushed down on the pin, and listened to the hiss of air. I moved to the Dodge Charger, then the Subaru, repeating the action. Finally, Brenda's car, each tire on each vehicle. The sound of escaping air filled the quiet suburban street. I stepped back inside, closing the front door quietly. The weight of the collected keys and wallets in my hand was substantial. I moved through the quiet house, my earlier actions replaying in my mind. A small, involuntary tightening of my jaw was the only indication of an internal shift. My gaze swept over the living room. The scattered clothes, the lingering scent. The immediate objective was clear: bring this scene into public view. On my terms. I found my position behind the oak newel post at the base of the stairs, slightly obscured from the top landing. The angle was good. I pulled out the digital camera again, confirming it was still ready to record. During my earlier recording, I'd noticed Brenda's cell phone on the bedside table, its screen dark. This was the next lever. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, a third time. From upstairs, I heard the faint, muffled vibration of a phone. She wouldn't ignore it. It rang a fourth time, then a fifth. Finally, a click. Hello? Her voice was breathless, a little too high, laced with a false cheerfulness. Hey, it's me, I said, keeping my own voice even, almost bored. The Albany client just canceled. Total bust. Looks like I'll be home in about 20-30 minutes. You probably didn't get my text, did you? Signal's spotty out here. I paused, letting the implication hang. What's for dinner? A beat of silence stretched, then a nervous, almost frantic laugh. Oh, Dale. No, I didn't see it. Yeah, that's fine. Dinner. Yeah, I'll figure something out. I was just, doing some laundry. Her explanation was weak. Her voice still thin. Right, I said, a slight inflection of mild disappointment in my tone. Okay, well, I'm already on the road. See you in a bit. Okay, bye. She hung up abruptly. The sounds from upstairs immediately became more urgent, a frantic shuffling. My plan was taking hold. My prediction was accurate. Within moments, the sounds of hasty movement intensified. I heard hushed whispers, low curses. Then, 4 figures, completely undressed, began descending the stairs. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and growing panic. Ken Miller, his heavy frame lumbering, was the first. The other 2 men followed, their eyes darting around the living room, clearly searching for something. Brenda was last, her body tensed, her eyes wide with a dawning realization of the impossible timeline. They saw the empty spaces where their clothes should have been. The men scrambled, searching pockets that weren't there. Ken cursed loudly. Brenda, her face paling, began pulling on a pair of jeans and a sweater from a small pile on the floor. Movements jerky and uncoordinated. The men, too, were dressing with a desperate speed, pulling on whatever mismatched items they could find. They moved as a panicked unit towards the front door. Brenda, now wearing a jacket and shoes, fumbled with the handle. She glanced out onto the street, her eyes scanning. But my Tacoma was parked further down, out of sight. As they spilled onto the porch, the confusion quickly escalated into anger. The men started shouting, all at once, their voices a cacophony. "Brenda? What the hell?" one yelled. "Where are our keys?" another demanded. Ken Miller's voice boomed above the others. "Brenda, what kind of game is this? Where are our goddamn wallets?" Brenda was turning to face them, her expression a mix of terror and bewilderment. This was my cue. I stepped out from behind the newel post, taking 2 strides to the front door. With a decisive movement, I slammed it shut, the impact echoing through the house. The lock clicked into place with a firm turn of the deadbolt. Brenda, through the glass pane of the door, turned her head just in time. Her eyes met mine. The color drained from her face, leaving it ashen. The recognition was absolute. "Dale, no! Dale, wait!" she pleaded, her voice muffled through the glass. She moved to the side window, pressing her face against it. "Dale, please, let us in. This isn't what it looks like." But the other men were already back at the front door. They started pounding on it, a rhythmic, aggressive thudding. "Open the damn door!" Ken roared. "We need our stuff. This is breaking and entering, pal." I ignored them. My phone was already in my hand. I dialed 911. "Emergency services." A calm voice answered. "Yes," I stated, my voice steady. "I'd like to report an attempted break-in at my residence. I've got 3 individuals, and my wife, trying to force their way into my home. They appear to be agitated and are banging on the door." "Your address, sir?" the dispatcher asked. I gave her the number and street. "Okay, sir. We already have a call for that address," she said. A neighbor reported some unusual activity. They mentioned a Dale Miller. "Is that you?" "Yes, it is," I confirmed. "Units are already en route. They should be there in under a minute," she said. True to her word, less than 2 minutes later, I saw the flashing blue and red lights through the side window. 2 patrol cars pulled up, one behind the other, their sirens cutting out with a final electronic sigh. The first 2 officers had already spoken with Brenda, their questions direct and their expressions unreadable. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket the officer had produced from his cruiser, shivering slightly despite the mild evening. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled. The men stood a few feet away, silent, watching her. I walked over to the officers, my steps deliberate. "Officer," I began, my voice clear and steady. My wife was clearly taken advantage of. These men, they mistreated her. I want them arrested. I gestured towards the 3 men with a slight nod of my head. Before the officers could respond, the men erupted. "Mistreated? What the hell?" Ken Miller exclaimed, stepping forward. "She invited us. She was practically begging us to come over. There was no mistreatment, officer. She consented to everything." The other 2 chimed in, echoing his claims, their voices loud and indignant. "Yeah. She called us, said her husband was out of town." The officers turned to me, then to the men, then finally, all eyes, including mine, settled on Brenda. The air grew heavy, thick with expectation. The truth, or at least one version of it, was about to be laid bare. Brenda kept her gaze fixed on the worn porch boards. She swallowed hard, her shoulders slumping. "Is that true, ma'am?" one of the officers asked, gently. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Yes," she choked out, her head still down. I invited them. And yes, I consented. The words were laced with shame, but they were unambiguous. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the three men. Ken Miller actually ran a hand through his thinning hair, a nervous laugh escaping him. "See?" he said to the officers, a triumphant edge in his voice. "We told you. No charges for mistreatment. Right?" Just then, two more patrol cars pulled up, their flashing lights adding to the surreal glow on the front lawn. Officers emerged, notebooks in hand. Names were taken, details recorded. The scene felt less like a domestic incident and more like a poorly staged play. The senior officer, a man with a tired face and a name tag that read, Sergeant Davies, turned to me. "Mr. Miller," he began, his tone weary. "Given your wife's admission, the legal avenues for any charges against these gentlemen are limited. Since she invited them and consented, it's not a matter of assault or forced entry." He paused, looking directly at Brenda, a hint of disdain in his eyes. "Perhaps some counseling might be in order for your household, ma'am." I met Sergeant Davies's gaze directly. "Officer," I stated, ignoring his recommendation, "I need you to call a taxi for my wife. She will not be permitted back into this house tonight. Or ever again." My voice was flat, leaving no room for argument. One of the other men, having ventured out to his F-150, returned to the porch, his face red with frustration. "My tires are flat," he yelled. "All of them! Who did this?" He immediately looked at me. "You stole our wallets and keys. And now you flattened our tires?" "Officer," I said to Sergeant Davies, cutting off the man, "I simply secured their belongings for their safety. I did not steal anything. As for the tires, that's not something I'm prepared to discuss at this moment. It was a lie, a small, logical evasion, and I felt no remorse." The men started to argue, but Sergeant Davies raised a hand, silencing them. "All right, gentlemen. We'll call you a cab. It appears your vehicles aren't going anywhere tonight." He motioned for one of the junior officers to make the call. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed, watching the group. Brenda still huddled in the blanket, her eyes darting between me and the officers. The men continued to mutter amongst themselves, frustrated and defeated. The taxi arrived after what felt like an eternity, a yellow sedan pulling up to the curb. As the men started towards the cab, Brenda separated herself from them. She walked slowly, hesitantly, towards me, her face a mask of pleading. "Dale," she began, her voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I can explain." I cut her off, my voice a sharp, cold blade. "Don't. Don't you dare." My eyes were fixed on hers, allowing no escape. "My heart is shattered, Brenda. Completely and utterly broken." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You're a strumpet. That's what you are." I took a step back, maintaining distance. "Any future communication between us will be through Calvin. You understand?" Without waiting for her reply, I turned, walked back inside, and closed the door, the deadbolt clicking home with a finality that echoed through the now silent house. The house felt cold, even though the heating was on. The silence, after the departure of the police and the taxi, was deafening. I walked back upstairs. The bedroom door stood ajar, a silent invitation to the scene of betrayal. The pervasive scent of their activity, now a sickly sweet and cloying odor, hit me with an almost physical force. It wasn't just the smell of cheap perfume anymore. It was the stench of deceit, a different kind of anger, hotter and less controlled than the calculated calm I had maintained, began to boil. My hands clenched. The bed, the very place where we had shared intimacy for years, now a stage for her infidelity. I ripped the duvet off, then the sheets, pulling them with a violent motion that sent them flying across the room. I seized a pillow and tore at it, feathers exploding into a white cloud. Furniture shifted as I pushed it aside. I threw open the closet doors, pulling Brenda's clothes from their hangers, letting them fall in a heap on the floor. Drawers were yanked open, their contents scattered. The room became a tempest of my making, a physical manifestation of the turmoil inside me. The mattress was heavy, but the adrenaline surging through me provided the strength. I dragged it from the bed frame, pulling it through the bedroom door, down the stairs, and out the front door. With a grunt, I heaved it onto the lawn, where it landed with a soft thud, a stark white rectangle against the darkening grass. Back inside, I headed for the garage. My old red toolbox sat on a shelf near the workbench. I grabbed it, the weight of the tools familiar in my hand. Returning to the bedroom, I began to dismantle the bed frame. The Allen wrench worked quickly on the hex bolts. Each turn was precise, mechanical. The headboard came off first, then the side rails, then the footboard. Piece by piece, the once sturdy frame was reduced to its components. I carried each piece outside, tossing them onto the lawn next to the mattress. The frame clattered as it hit the ground. With the bedroom now stripped bare of its central piece, I noticed Brenda's cell phone on the floor near where the bed had been. It must have fallen during her frantic dressing. I picked it up. The screen was still dark. I pressed the power button, and it lit up. No password. She never used one. I scrolled through her contacts, a grim curiosity guiding my fingers. Familiar names, then a few that were new. I opened her messages. The expected pattern of innocuous texts with me, then a different kind of conversation. Flirtatious, suggestive. The names Ken, Mike, Dave, Chad appeared frequently. I moved to her photo gallery. What I found there was not surprising, yet it still made my stomach churn. Photos, explicit in nature, of Brenda with men I didn't know. Not just pictures, but short video clips. My face remained impassive as I watched. Brenda, laughing, her head thrown back, engaging in carnal acts with strangers. These weren't fleeting encounters. The comfort level, the expressions, the way they interacted suggested a familiarity, a history. She knew these men. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a pattern. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. I had been so blind, so trusting. A fool. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my chest. My naivete was almost comical in its extent. I started on the boxes. We had several storage boxes in the bedroom closet, containing old photos, mementos, and seasonal clothes. I pulled them out, one by one. Downstairs they went, to the front lawn. I opened each box, dumping its contents onto the grass, separating them into two piles. My things. Her things. With the main bedroom thoroughly purged, I moved to the guest room. This was where Brenda often kept her overflow. Extra sweaters, shoes she rarely wore, some decorative items. I systematically went through the drawers, the closet. Everything that belonged to her was gathered, tossed into boxes, and carried downstairs. The process was methodical, almost clinical. Each item removed was a severing of a tie, a step towards a clean, final break. With the main bedroom cleared, I shifted my attention to the guest room. It was typically less used, a space for visitors or for Brenda's overflow items. I began my methodical process there, too. The dresser, a sturdy oak piece, was my first target. Each drawer was emptied, its contents sorted into my pile, or her pile on the floor. Then, I carried the empty drawers out, one by one, to join the growing collection on the front lawn. I reached the bottom drawer. I pulled, but it didn't budge fully. It slid out a few inches, then stopped abruptly, as if something were wedged beneath it, preventing its complete extraction. I tried again, a little more force, but it remained stubbornly fixed. My initial calm, a thin veneer over the deeper current of anger, began to crack. This minor obstruction felt like a deliberate challenge. A surge of irritation, cold and sharp, went through me. I gripped the drawer handle with both hands, bracing my feet. With a grunt, I yanked hard, putting all my weight and frustration into the pull. There was a sharp, distinct crack that echoed in the quiet room, a sound of wood protesting under strain. The drawer finally gave way, sliding out with a suddenness that nearly unbalanced me. I looked inside. The obstruction wasn't immediately visible. I lifted the floral drawer liner, a flimsy piece of paper Brenda had insisted on years ago. Beneath it, tucked into a false bottom, lay a stack of DVDs. 7, possibly 8, discs in slim plastic cases, hidden. My hand trembled almost imperceptibly as I reached for them. In my haste, or perhaps the lingering anger from the drawer's resistance, I inadvertently squeezed too hard on the first case. The thin plastic crinkled, and a hairline crack appeared on its surface. The disc inside, however, remained intact. A familiar sinking sensation settled in my chest. Not a surprise, perhaps, but a confirmation of a depth I hadn't yet fully plumbed. I picked up the stack, the weight surprisingly significant. I carried them downstairs, not bothering to sort anything else from the guest room for the moment. The DVDs took precedence. In the living room, I sat on the sofa. The light from the evening sun, now low in the sky, cast long shadows. I began to scrutinize the titles on the discs. Each one was handwritten on the label with a fine point marker, in Brenda's neat, looping script. The first read, Brenda and Ken, August. Another, Party Night, Mike and Friends. A third, Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, Chad. Each title was a precise, painful arrow, aimed directly at my naive assumptions. The cold resolve that had been building inside me solidified further with every title I read. This wasn't just a lapse. It was a curated collection. A history. A pattern of betrayal, carefully documented. It made me think about how everyone, eventually, faces the fallout of their decisions. If you're listening, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. I set the stack of DVDs down on the coffee table. I cleared off the low, open shelves beneath the television, making space. I arranged the discs in a neat row, their titles facing outward, like exhibits in a museum of infidelity. Each one was clear, distinct. My breathing felt shallow. I took a deep, steadying breath, a conscious effort to prepare myself. This was not a moment for rash emotion, but for cold, hard data collection. I reached for the first disc, my fingers brushing against the cracked plastic case. It was time to watch. The glow of the television screen illuminated the otherwise dim living room. I inserted the first disc into the DVD player. The static cleared, and the image materialized. It was Brenda, and with her, Martha Olson, Brenda's close friend. They were at Martha's house, in her living room, a place Brenda claimed to visit every Tuesday and Thursday for book club or girls' night. The dates on the screen confirmed it. Tuesdays, Thursdays. What unfolded on the screen was not a book club. It was a rotating cast of men, Martha and Brenda. The footage was grainy at times, clearly shot with a hidden camera, but the content was unambiguous. Brenda, Martha, and various individuals engaging in explicit acts. The acts themselves were clinical in their depiction, almost mundane in their repetition. It was a production line of infidelity. I watched for hours, the disc playing out, then the next, and the next. My eyes burned. And occasionally, a tear would well up, blurring the image for a moment before I blinked it away. But the emotions, though present, were secondary. My mind remained cold, analytical. I was collecting data. Each encounter, each partner, each date was a piece of the puzzle, confirming what I had begun to suspect. I paused only when I reached the final 2 discs. There was something about them, a different handwriting on the labels, a sense of gravity, that made me hold my breath. I took a sip of the lukewarm water that sat beside me. My throat was dry. I inserted the second-to-last disc. The scene shifted. This time, Brenda was not with Martha. She was with a younger man, athletic in build, dark hair. I recognized him immediately. It was Gary, her tennis instructor. The same instructor whose lessons I had paid for, believing they were for her health and enjoyment. The footage showed them in a different setting. A private residence, not a tennis court. Again, intimate acts, consensual, explicit. I made a mental note of the dates displayed on the screen, comparing them to my memory of her lesson schedule. They overlapped perfectly. Tuesdays, Thursdays, sometimes a Saturday, while I was at work or on business trips or simply at home, thinking she was improving her backhand. The systematic nature of her infidelity became chillingly clear. This wasn't spontaneous, drunken mistakes. This was planned, organized, a calculated lifestyle choice, meticulously documented, unknowingly, by her. I saw men I recognized from Brenda's phone, men whose numbers I had seen in her contacts: Ken Miller, Mike, Dave, Chad. Different faces, different settings, but the same underlying pattern. The exploitation of my trust, the draining of my finances, all under the guise of her hobbies and friendships. Each disc I watched peeled back a new layer of planned deceit. Her moral bankruptcy was laid bare, undeniable, irrefutable. My initial emotional response to her betrayal had given way to a stark, methodical accumulation of facts. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a sense of purpose. I knew now what I needed to do. I retrieved a fresh notebook and a pen from my desk drawer. I opened it to the first blank page. On the top, I wrote, "Evidence log, Brenda Miller." My hand was steady. I began to list every detail. Disc number, date of recording, individuals present, specific acts, approximate duration. This wasn't just for me anymore. This was for Calvin. This was for the legal strategy that would surely follow. Every detail mattered. Every single piece of evidence would be documented, categorized, and used. The first call I made the next morning, as soon as office hours began, was to Calvin Hayes. Calvin had handled my business contracts for years, a shrewd but fair lawyer, known for his methodical approach. "Calvin," I began, my voice flat. "I need to see you. It's urgent. Divorce. And it's complicated." He knew my marriage was usually stable, so his immediate response was a quick offer for an emergency slot. We scheduled for that afternoon. I arrived at his downtown office promptly at 2, carrying a briefcase. Inside were the DVDs, Brenda's cell phone, a printed log of her messages, and my meticulously compiled evidence log. Calvin, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and keen eyes, greeted me with a firm handshake. He offered coffee. I declined. "All right, Dale, lay it on me," he said, settling back into his leather chair. I opened the briefcase. First, I placed the DVDs on his desk. These are video recordings. 7 of them. They show Brenda engaging in extramarital affairs. I then handed him Brenda's phone. Her cell phone. Text messages, emails, photos, more video. She left it at the house. Finally, I presented my handwritten log. This outlines dates, names, locations, and financial transactions I've started tracing. Calvin picked up the first DVD case, his expression unreadable. He then scrolled through Brenda's phone for a few moments, his eyebrows slowly rising. He picked up my log, flipping through the pages. The silence in the office stretched, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. After several minutes, he set everything down. "Dale," he said, his voice low, "this is Comprehensive. Overwhelming. Actually, I've seen a lot of divorce cases, but the extent of this documentation is exceptional. He leaned forward. This changes things. Dramatically. We moved straight into discussing the legal grounds. Adultery is clear, Calvin stated. And with this volume, we can argue moral turpitude, a pattern of behavior which can affect everything from asset division to potential alimony. Our conversation shifted to the financial aspect. She used your money for these activities, Dale, Calvin pointed out. The tennis lessons you paid for, the gatherings at Martha's place, that likely incurred costs. We can argue these were misappropriations of marital funds, not legitimate expenses. We'll need to trace every relevant transaction. He outlined the strategy. Given this evidence, we'll aim for a disproportionate asset division in your favor. Alimony will be heavily contested, likely minimal, if any, and we can explore punitive damages, especially if any of these individuals were aware of your marriage and actively participated in defrauding you. He looked at the DVDs again. This Ken Miller, for example. We'll need to address his involvement. Over the next hour, I provided Calvin with access to all our joint bank accounts, credit card statements, and relevant receipts. My task was to go back, cross-reference my evidence log with the financial statements, and create a precise timeline of expenditures linked to her activities. Every girls' night, every tennis lesson, every suspicious transaction would be highlighted. We also discussed the wider implications, the public nature of some of the recordings, the identities of the men involved, including Ken Miller. This could have significant professional and social ramifications for Brenda, Calvin noted, and potentially for Ken Miller, depending on his standing in the community. My decision was firm. Calvin, I said, my gaze steady. I want full justice. No holds barred. I want this marriage logically dismantled, and I want her to face the full consequences of her choices. Understood, Calvin replied, a grim nod. We'll proceed accordingly. He began sketching out the formal divorce petition, incorporating the detailed evidence I had provided. Throughout the entire consultation, I maintained my composure. There was no shouting, no dramatic displays of emotion, just facts, evidence, and a clear strategic path forward. My focus was singular, the logical and complete severance of my life from hers, and the securement of a judgment that reflected the truth of her betrayal. The process moved swiftly. Within 2 weeks, Brenda was served. The documents were thick, dense with legal language, but the core message was clear: a petition for divorce based on adultery and a detailed list of evidence, including copies of specific message logs and references to video recordings. Her initial response, as Calvin had predicted, was denial. She reached out, through her own freshly acquired attorney, claiming I was fabricating evidence, that I was a bitter, jealous husband attempting to ruin her reputation. She tried to discredit my character, portraying me as unstable, imagining things. It was a predictable, desperate play. The real unveiling came during the initial mediation session. We were in a conference room, not a courtroom, but the atmosphere was just as tense. Brenda sat across from me, her attorney beside her, Ken Miller and Martha Olson present as character witnesses for her, a foolish tactical error on their part. I sat with Calvin. The mediator, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, presided. Calvin began methodically. He started with the date of my unexpected return home. He then pulled out a small projector. We have here, he announced calmly, footage recorded from Mr. Play's, Miller's residence on the day of the incident. The first video clip played. It was the footage from the bedroom door, the raw, unfiltered scene of Brenda with Ken Miller and the other men. The muffled sounds, the contorted faces, the unmistakable acts. A gasp escaped Brenda. Her face, which had been pale, turned a mottled red. Ken Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes wide. Martha Olson looked away, her jaw tight, The mediator's pen paused mid-stroke. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the projector. Once the initial shock subsided, Calvin introduced the hidden DVD collection. "And this," he continued, holding up one of the discs, "is merely one in a series. These discs, found hidden in a dresser, detail a systematic pattern of extramarital affairs, recorded by Miss Miller herself, over a period of months, possibly years. He didn't play them all, but he described their contents, naming dates, locations, and the recurring individuals, including Ken Miller and Brenda's tennis instructor, Gary. I observed Brenda. Her head was bowed, her shoulders hunched. The initial bravado had evaporated. Ken Miller cleared his throat repeatedly, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding contact with anyone. Martha Olson, who had once been Brenda's staunchest ally, now looked utterly repulsed. I made a mental note of each reaction, a silent record for my own satisfaction. When it was my turn, I spoke with a quiet, factual tone. I recounted finding the cars, the clothes, hearing the sounds, the initial recording. I detailed the discovery of the DVDs, the methodical documentation. I spoke of the emotional impact, the betrayal of trust, the feeling of foolishness, but without any discernible anger or sadness in my voice. It was simply a recitation of facts. Calvin then laid out the financial records. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. He cross-referenced the dates from the DVDs and the phone logs with expenditures. Funds designated for household expenses, for joint activities, and even for Miss Preson's. Miller's purported self-improvement, such as tennis lessons, were instead diverted to facilitate these illicit activities, he stated, highlighting specific transactions on a large projected spreadsheet. Brenda's legal team, a young associate and a senior partner who looked increasingly disheveled, struggled. They tried to object, to question the authenticity, but the sheer volume and consistency of the evidence rendered their efforts futile. The phone was hers, the handwriting was hers, the locations were verified. The mediator, usually impartial, leaned forward. "Miss Miller," she said, her voice stern, "the depth of this deceit, the systematic nature of your conduct, is highly concerning. This is not simply a matter of infidelity. It appears to be a sustained pattern of marital fraud." I remained calm. I let the evidence speak for itself. My job was done. The moral consequences were now unfolding publicly. Brenda's shame was palpable. Her reputation, once pristine in our small community, shattered in that room. The negotiations, which had initially been contentious, shifted dramatically. The leverage was unequivocally mine. The settlement discussions would now proceed on my terms. The final divorce decree arrived by mail, a thick envelope from Calvin's office. I opened it with a letter opener, the motion precise and unhurried. The terms were as expected, as negotiated under the weight of the undeniable evidence. Brenda Carlson received minimal assets from the marriage. The house, all my retirement accounts, my personal savings, they remained mine. Her claim for alimony was denied outright. Furthermore, the court ordered her to pay a significant portion of my legal costs, a punitive measure acknowledging her conduct. The judgment itself was stark. It explicitly cited her moral turpitude and the financial exploitation of marital assets for illicit activities. It wasn't just a legal separation. It was a public declaration of her deceit. Calvin had ensured every detail was included, setting a clear precedent that her actions carried consequences. Word travels fast in a Midwestern town, especially when the details are as sensational as ours. News of the scandalous divorce, fueled by whispers and confirmed by the undeniable facts presented in court, became common knowledge. People talked in grocery aisles, at church potlucks, across back fences. The specifics of the videos, the systematic nature of her betrayal, they became an open secret. Ken Miller, I heard through Calvin, faced serious professional repercussions. He was a regional sales manager for a local dealership, a position that relied heavily on public trust and reputation. The details of his involvement, particularly the video evidence, led to his dismissal. His wife, I understood, initiated her own divorce proceedings shortly thereafter. Martha Olson, Brenda's close friend, also found her social standing diminished. Her husband, who had been oblivious to her own involvement in Brenda's gatherings, was reportedly mortified. Their reputations, once solid within the community, were now tarnished, stained by association and revealed activities. I reflected on the arduous journey. There was a grim satisfaction in the outcome, a cold, hard justice achieved. But it was devoid of joy. There was no elation, no triumphant feeling, only a quiet affirmation that the truth had been brought to light, and consequences had been delivered, precisely and logically. I walked through the house, now truly mine again. The absence of Brenda was palpable, but it wasn't an emptiness. The house felt purged, cleansed, no longer tainted by her presence, or by the insidious memories of betrayal. The rooms breathed differently. The air was cleaner. I began the quiet process of rebuilding my life. Alone. The solitude was not isolating. It was a necessary space for clarity. I understood, with an unwavering certainty, the true, devastating cost of betrayal. It wasn't just the loss of a marriage or the financial strain. It was the shattering of trust, the erosion of a shared reality. And I understood the necessity of my logical, calculated actions. They weren't born of malice, but of a fundamental need for truth and accountability. The finality of the divorce was a definitive end to that long, painful chapter of my life. The past was sealed, documented, and laid to rest. In the aftermath, I found a quiet, almost unsettling peace. It wasn't the peace of happiness, but a clarity born of pain, a deep understanding of human nature and its capacity for both deceit and resilience. The future remained uncertain, as all futures do, but I faced it unbound by deceit, grounded in a new, colder reality, a man irrevocably changed, yet paradoxically, more whole.